Episode 1. Uno. To kick this one off, we meet Saul Goodman after the events of Breaking Bad, where he is now working at a Cinnabon in Omaha with the alias Gene Takovic. He is hiding out as he is a wanted man and finds himself missing his old life from time to time. We then jump all the way back to 2002, where he goes by his real name, Jimmy McGill, and he is a struggling public defender and takes the most boring, no chance in winning cases and doesn't get paid much for his work, which upsets him. After he leaves court one day, he gets a call from a potential big client and he pretends to be a big shot lawyer. On his way out, he meets Mike Ehrmantraut, who is a parking lot attendant who gives Jimmy a tough time because he has to pay for his parking passes. He heads to his office where a couple of punk kids try scamming him out of injury money, but Jimmy says he doesn't play that game. They scurry off. When he gets to his office that is in the back of a nail salon, he sees a letter from a law firm, Hamlin, and McGill. He goes to the firm where his brother, Chuck McGill, is a partner and also a big shot lawyer. He's been gone recently due to an illness, and Howard Hamlin is trying to buy his brother out of his share in the company. But Chuck won't budge. Jimmy tells Howard to pay Chuck his full $17 million and then he will leave the company. On his way out, he runs into Kim Wexler, another lawyer at the firm who seems to be good friends with him. Jimmy then goes over to Chuck's house to relay the information Howard told him, and Chuck is suffering from electromagnetic hypersensitivity, which means he can't have any electronics near him or he'll lose his mind. Very odd indeed. Jimmy tells his brother that he has to go back to work or settle with HHM because he is running out of money. After he leaves, Jimmy goes to the skate park and asks the two scammers from earlier if they want to pull a job together. He used to do them all the time and went by the nickname Slippin Jimmy. They all stage a job but do it to the wrong person, an old lady. They chase the car home after she didn't stop and they follow her into her house where she is the grandmother of Tuco Salamanca, a local drug boss. Jimmy wonders what is taking so long, so he goes up to the door and Tuco tells him to come into the house with a gun to his face. Episode 2. Mijo. The twins head into the house where Tuco can smell out that they are trying to scam his grandmother, and then out nowhere, he knocks them out with a cane. This is when Jimmy knocks on the door to see what is going on. Jimmy explains that he is their attorney and has no idea what they were doing. Jimmy sweet-talks him, but when one of the twins tells Tuco that it was all Jimmy's idea, Tuco gets infuriated. Jimmy is then tied up too, and Tuco takes them all out into the desert along with his minions, Gonzo, Nodos, and Nacho. Jimmy tries explaining it all as a mistake, but Tuco thinks it is BS, and Jimmy says he is a lawyer and if Tuco ever needs one, he will do it for free. Nacho reasons with Tuco and tells him killing a lawyer would not go so well for them in the future. Tuco lets them all live, but breaks one of each twin's legs. Afterwards, Jimmy drives them both to the hospital to get checked out. With the crazy day he had, Jimmy goes to a restaurant and gets really drunk. He then heads over to Chuck's house where he falls asleep. The following day, Jimmy tells Chuck what happened and Chuck thinks Jimmy is going back to his old ways. But Jimmy assures him he's not. A few weeks pass and one day, Nacho shows up at his office and Nacho wants Jimmy's help to steal some money from the Kettlemans, a couple who wronged Jimmy not too long ago. Apparently they embezzle all of their money, so Nacho wants to steal it because they can't report it. Jimmy says no as he isn't a criminal, but Nacho leaves his phone number if he decides to change his mind. Episode 3. Nacho. In a flashback, Jimmy is in jail on some fraud charges and Chuck is his lawyer and tells him he will get him out, but he has to stop being Slippin Jimmy and grow up. Jimmy promises he will. In 2002, Jimmy indirectly tries to warn the Kettlemans that someone will try stealing their money. He calls from a payphone and tells them to look outside and they see Nacho's van. The next morning, Kim tells Jimmy that something happened to the Kettlemans and speeds off to find out what happened and has another run-in with Mike, who seems annoyed with Jimmy. When he gets to their house, there are police everywhere and the family is missing. Jimmy thinks Nacho took them, but then two police walk up to Jimmy and they arrested Nacho the night prior and he told them Jimmy was his lawyer. Nacho claims his innocence and says he didn't do anything to the Kettlemans. Jimmy checks out their house and he comes to believe they staged the kidnapping and ran off after Jimmy tipped them someone was coming. He goes back to the courthouse but gets into an altercation with Mike for not paying his fines and the two get into a scuffle and Jimmy gets arrested, but Mike drops the charges so he is let go. Jimmy asks him why he did that and Mike says he believes Nacho is innocent and Jimmy needs to represent him, not be in jail. Mike explains he was once a police officer in Philadelphia and he encountered a similar case where a family staged their disappearance to avoid being caught of fraud. Mike believes the Kettlemans didn't leave town and are just hiding out nearby their house. Jimmy goes back to their neighborhood and finds them camping out in the forest near their house. Jimmy tells them to tell the police Nacho is innocent, but they don't want to as they will be caught. Jimmy then finds a bag with $1.5 million inside they presumably had embezzled. Episode 4. Hero. This episode begins with another flashback of Jimmy committing one of his cons and scamming someone out of $3,000 with a fake Rolex. Back to 2002 and the Kettlemans try bribing Jimmy with $30,000 and Jimmy, in desperate need for money, actually agrees to it, but gives him a picture to show the police that they aren't dead or kidnapped. This gets Nacho released from jail the following day, and Nacho tells Jimmy he's still on his hit list for tipping the Kettlemans off in the first place. Jimmy said he did it because he didn't want their children getting harmed, and Nacho says he wasn't going to hurt anyone, let alone kids. Jimmy uses the money he got from the Kettlemans to pay for a huge billboard advertisement that says Jimmy McGill is your next lawyer. This irritates Howard Hamlin though, because it makes it look like Jimmy is associated with their firm, considering their name is Hamlin McGill. Not everyone would know McGill is for Chuck, not Jimmy. Howard sends him a cease and desist order and demands the billboard to be taken down. Jimmy uses this to his advantage and tells the public how he is being bullied and shunned by HHM. It actually works and generates more positive public news coverage for his practice, bringing new clients on. Later on, he takes Chuck his groceries at home, and Jimmy doesn't want Chuck to see the newspaper because he is on the front page for his recent doings, so he leaves it outside. When he leaves, Chuck shockingly goes outside to grab his neighbor's newspaper and sees the story and how Jimmy is building his law practice up, which infuriates Chuck. He doesn't think Jimmy should be a lawyer defending actual clients. Episode 5. Alpine Shepherd Boy. Chuck's neighbor calls the cops on him for stealing their newspaper, and when they arrive, they believe there is some drug production going on with all the fuel cans and damaged electricity lines, so they break into his house and taser him. Chuck is then hospitalized, and the doctor tells Jimmy that he believes Chuck should be put into a mental institution with his current illness. Jimmy convinces her that Chuck is fine and he is being taken care of every day by Jimmy. The doctor tells Jimmy that Chuck's disease is all in his head and nothing will actually happen to him if he goes near electricity. Howard then arrives and thinks this is all a ploy to make sure Chuck is still partner at their company and has power of attorney, so Chuck gets every cent he's owed instead of a cash settlement, which Howard wants. Eventually, Jimmy is able to take Chuck home. Kim tells Jimmy that he should specialize in elder law, so Jimmy goes to a local retirement home trying to scout new clients he could represent for various things. The first one is an elderly woman that is hiring Jimmy to prepare her will. Leaving the courthouse one day, Jimmy talks with Mike and the two seem to get along now, and Jimmy gives Mike his business card if he ever needs a lawyer for anything. After Mike gets off work, he eats and then goes to a house where he sits outside for a bit and then makes eye contact with a woman whenever she leaves, but doesn't say anything. When Mike gets home, he is visited by two detectives, and Mike tells them he is a long way from home, and one of them says, "You and me both." Episode 6. 5-0. A flashback shows Mike when he first arrived in Albuquerque, and he waits for his daughter-in-law, Stacy, to pick him up at the train station. While waiting, he goes into the bathroom and applies a pad to a bullet injury under his shirt. Mike promises Stacy that he is going to stay in town as long as he can to support her and her daughter, Kaylee. We learn that Mike's son, Matt, died while on the job as a police officer, and Stacy suspects Mike knows more about the incident than he is telling her. Stacy heard he and Mike fighting on the phone days before his death. Mike says it is over with and they need to move on. Back to 2002, where Mike is being interrogated by the two police officers from the last episode, both from Philadelphia. Mike calls Jimmy in to be his counsel for whatever they believe he did. The story is Mike was a cop in Philly for 30 years and his son Matt was a rookie on the force and died 9 months ago. Apparently, they were corrupt cops and Matt found out and was disappointed his dad was a dirty cop and accepted bribes. Some other corrupt cops were afraid Matt was going to turn them in and they killed him and made it look like an accident. The cops are there to know what Mike knew about his son's death. He tells them he told them everything he knew. Another flashback 3 months earlier shows Mike confronting the two cops that he believed killed Matt, and he tells them he knows what they did. Mike pretended to be drunk so he could lure them in, and when they get away somewhere private, Mike shoots one of the guys. He is hit by a bullet from the other dude, but Mike is able to fire back and kill the other guy. That's why the cops are in New Mexico now. They are investigating the other two deaths and think Mike did it, but have no proof. Mike then tells Stacy all of the truth and how Matt was a clean cop, not dirty. Episode 7. Bingo. Mike tells Jimmy that was all he needed, and if for some reason he did go to trial for murdering 2 cops, Jimmy would represent him. Mike says they should be fine, he cleaned up after himself. A few days later, Jimmy goes to Chuck's house and sees him outside, which means he's progressing a little better. But Chuck runs inside after only 2 minutes. Jimmy is trying everything he can, hoping to get Chuck back to work and actually doing cases again and making money. Jimmy leaves his client's documents at Chuck's house in hopes of him stumbling upon them and miss being a lawyer and go back to HHM. Kim goes with Jimmy to look at potential new law offices for his practice and tries convincing Kim to be partner with him. But she says she is loyal to HHM. The Kettlemans have appeared again and they are looking for someone to be their lawyer, and when they try HHM, Kim says the best they could do is a plea bargain and a little bit of jail time because they're still missing money. They don't want that, so they call Jimmy and tell him they'll hire him if he can get them off scot-free and no prison time. He knows it will be difficult, but they blackmail him because he took their bribe earlier, so he has to accept the case. Kim is demoted at work for losing the Kettlemans case, and Jimmy feels bad for her. Jimmy learns that some of the money is missing that the Kettlemans stole, and the only way they can get off free is if all of it is returned. Jimmy knows they are hiding it, so he has Mike go to their house and find the remaining money and then gives it to Kim so she can get her case back for HHM. But now, since he gave that deal up, he doesn't have the funds to purchase his new office anymore. The episode closes as he receives a new potential client. Episode 8. RICO. A flashback shows Jimmy when he was working at HHM in the mailroom many years ago before he became a lawyer. He passed his bar exam and Kim was so happy for him. Jimmy shows Chuck his results and Chuck reluctantly is proud of him, and when Jimmy asks Howard for a promotion to a lawyer position, Howard lets him go for some reason. In present day, Jimmy continues to work in elder law, but still has no true office to do his business out of. While he is helping a client, Irene Landry, with her will, he discovers that the assisted living center she lives at, Sandpiper Crossing, is greatly overcharging her for her living expenses. Jimmy talks to Chuck about it, and Chuck says he could have a case for elder abuse and taking advantage of an old lady who doesn't know any better. When Jimmy goes back to talk to her, the business has a new policy of legal solicitation and he isn't allowed inside. He asks to use the restroom and hears a paper shredder going on in the back, and he tells them he hopes they aren't destroying any evidence because that would be a crime. That night, Jimmy goes through their dumpster looking for any paperwork they may have shredded. Jimmy and Chuck then work together and put together an invoice with the shreds. Chuck realizes they may have something here, and he tells Jimmy he will aid him in a class action lawsuit against the company. A few days later, they meet with Sandpiper's lawyer, Rich, to negotiate after sending a demand letter to them. Jimmy says the shreds they recovered proves that they were overbilling items from another state too, which would make it eligible for a RICO case. Rich asks how much the settlement price they want is, and Chuck says $20 million or they'll see each other in court. With the thrill of somewhat practicing again, Chuck goes outside to Jimmy's car and realizes that he isn't experiencing his normal symptoms that he does when he goes outside. Episode 9. Pimento. Jimmy is proud of Chuck for going outside and being brave, and then they get back to the case. Sandpiper tries filing a restraining order against Jimmy from being on their property, but the judge doesn't buy it and rules in Jimmy's favor as he is Irene's lawyer. When Jimmy gets back to Chuck's, they realize how much paperwork this class action will need done, and Chuck says they should bring HHM on to assist them with the case. Jimmy reluctantly agrees. The following day, they all go to HHM together and Jimmy lined Chuck's suit with a space blanket in hopes of easing him in a bit. Howard doesn't actually want to work with Jimmy and wants to buy him out of his part of the class action lawsuit, and HHM take the case completely over. He will receive a large settlement after it is over as well. Jimmy is upset at Howard and asks why he won't hire him on and what does he have against him. Jimmy says he will not be relinquishing the case to HHM and he leaves. Meanwhile, Mike takes up a man that had a job for him where he has to bodyguard a powerful person and not let anything happen. Mike goes with the guy, Price, who is extremely impressed with Mike after he disarms 2 other bodyguards that were acting tough. They arrive at the drug deal and it turns out he is dealing with Nacho Varga. Mike researched Nacho before they arrived and he knows that Nacho is doing this deal behind Tuco's back and will use that against him if anything were to go wrong. Price is very impressed with Mike. Kim visits Jimmy at the nail salon and strongly urges him to take the HHM deal. The following morning, Jimmy goes to Chuck's house and says he'll give the case to HHM. Jimmy also knows that Chuck is the reason Howard won't hire him at HHM. Chuck doesn't think Jimmy is good enough to be a lawyer, let alone one at a huge firm. It wasn't Howard that didn't want Jimmy working there, It was his own brother. Howard was just relaying the message. Jimmy, being very upset, tells Chuck he brought him supplies to last for a few days. But he's on his own after that. He's done taking care of Chuck, who won't return the favor. Episode 10. Marco. Season finale. A flashback shows Jimmy saying goodbye to his con-partner Marco, and he's moving to Albuquerque to start off fresh and clean. In present day, Jimmy goes to HHM and hands over all of the documents of the Sandpiper case and anything related to Chuck, as he isn't helping him anymore. Jimmy goes to the bingo hall with Irene, and he's just in a bad place and not in a great mental state after the argument with Chuck. The following day, he abruptly leaves and heads back to his hometown of Cicero, Illinois, where he meets Marco at the same bar that he left from before. The two go back to old ways and pulling cons with one another. After a week, Jimmy realizes he needs to go back to New Mexico because he has actual clients that he needs to work with, but Marco wants to pull the Rolex con one more time. While doing it, Marco has a heart attack and goes unconscious. He then briefly wakes up and tells Jimmy this was the greatest week of his life, and then he passes away. At his funeral 2 days later, Kim calls Jimmy and tells him that they are bringing another firm onto the Sandpiper case, Davis and Main of Santa Fe, and they want to hire Jimmy on with them. Jimmy returns to Albuquerque in hopes of meeting with them. The season closes with Mike and Jimmy sharing a moment talking about the good things they have done recently and how they returned the Kettleman's money. But if they get an opportunity again to take off with $1 million, they're taking it, no questions asked. And that is how the season ends. We'll do season 2 in my next video, so I hope you can check that one out when I get it uploaded. Thanks for watching.